Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Welcome to the Reality OS with Tracy Connors and me, Peter Duke. And today we're joined by Dr. Hamamoto. How are you guys doing today?
Wonderful. Thank you.
So what'd you think of that video there, Tracy?
I thought that was pretty interesting, Peter. I seem to recall it, but I think that the end should be changed to drop the different and just say think.
Think, yeah. The different thing, it kind of portends to the whole populist thing, which is fraught with peril, right?
Right. Well, it was also straight up rip off of Apple.
Well, okay, there's that.
But that was done back in 2016, right, Peter?
Yeah, we did. I did that with my partner who will not be named, and we did that in October of 2016, I think. When we were just on a riff. We did those Think Different posters in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Jack Dorsey actually liked one of our tweets. It's kind of a funny story. I'll try to make it quick. We put posters up that had that Apple logo, but we changed the Apple rainbow to the gay rainbow. And when we were putting them up in San Francisco, we didn't realize it was actually National Coming Out Day. And there was a hashtag National Coming Out Day. And so what I did after we put the posters up and we posted the pictures is that we started thanking all of the people who were sharing their coming out stories for the bravery of coming out, and shared that it gave us confidence to come out in our support for Donald Trump, who was running for president at that time. And Jack Dorsey, without realizing it, actually liked one of our tweets. So we quickly screenshotted it, because as soon as I saw that he had liked it, I could imagine the people running down the hallway into his office going, Jack, what are you doing? But that's probably a pretty good intro for what we wanted to talk about today, because Dr. Hamamoto, he's kind of this autodidact polymath that touches on all kinds of different subjects with great authority. And one of the things that he loves to talk about is popular culture, and how it actually affects everything around us. And we all know that Andrew said that politics is downstream from culture. And he may have lost his life for sharing that too vociferously, but that's Peter putting his tinfoil hat on. Anyway, so where do we want to start today, guys?
Well, that advertisement, the promo was quite poignant, precisely because Andrew Breitbart is in it, and he's no longer with us. And to a large degree, he created a space, a conversational space, an intellectual space, an emotional space for the Trump movement, the Make America Great Again movement. And it shows you the power of the word, of analysis, of insight. He's a media revolutionary. And somebody, and it probably won't be someone from the left, which really is what controls the publishing, academic as well as trade publishing industries. But Andrew Breitbart's career needs to be reassessed in light of what's transpired over the past 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I had a meeting with Ryan Williams about 6 months ago, who runs the Claremont Institute.
Oh, excellent.
And they have the Publius Fellowship, which is teaches the Federalist Papers, and they have the Lincoln Fellowship, which teaches kind of the Harry Jaffa framework for Abraham Lincoln. And the thing that I was telling him is that there really needs to be an Andrew Breitbart Fellowship that really focuses on culture and media and understanding how that is used for good reason, for good things and for bad things. I mean, it's insidious in the way that it's been implemented the last 50 years.
It's a brilliant idea.
Were they receptive to that idea?
You know what? He heard me. The thing is about a fellowship is usually you just have to go get donors that will support it, right? And that's one of the big issues on the right is that, people don't get supported like they do on the left. There's the famous story of David Brock, who was on the right, wrote the Clinton Troopergate stories. And then after Bill Clinton became elected, had a meeting with Bill Clinton, and then suddenly Media Matters was born, financed to the tune of millions of dollars a year for, the foreseeable future. And David Brock suddenly switched sides and became the biggest opponent in the culture on the right.
And he memorialized it in the book, Blinded by the Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, he had to write the cover story, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, but I didn't realize that he was given the proverbial offer he couldn't refuse from the Clinton Foundation.
Right. Well,
this is before the Clinton Foundation.
Pardon me?
This was even before the Clinton Foundation.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, first they try to bribe you, and then if they can't bribe you, then they try to coerce you, and if they can't coerce you, then they end you. So
that's the plata o plomo model.
Silver
or lead.
Silver or lead.
Yeah, it's your choice.
Plata o plomo. And where is that from?
It's Spanish. Plata is silver.
Español. It's the U.S. Mexico border. It's treachery.
So just going to the kind of like subliminal of it, jumping back to that Apple, the soundtrack from that Apple video that we culture jammed. The music was specially composed just for that piece, and there's actually a whole website or a whole web page by the guy who wrote the piece about how it went, how he wrote it, and all of those things. But since you guys both have guitars sitting behind you, I was wondering if you could speak to the kind of persuasive nature of like major chords and how that affects people emotionally, because I think a huge part of the impact of that is really just the music behind the voice.
Absolutely. And it operates almost on a subliminal level. Tracy, why don't you take that first?
Oh, I was going to kick it to you because I just dabble.
Okay. All right. I heard a pad. It's called a pad, PAD, which is sort of a long, sustained synthesizer pad. And there are certain intervals, and this is not, me saying this is Pythagoras. Right? There's a whole sonic alchemy that goes back into the mists of history when the first person started beating on a log or developed a chordophone rather. And coincidentally, I've been studying these soundtracks. I forgot the person's name, but I was studying the soundtrack of The Dark Knight, trying to figure it out.
Maybe somebody in the chat room can tell us who it is.
Yeah, he's a brilliant composer. And I'm really, Tracy and I were talking about instruments. This guy has a whole studio full of vintage analog synthesizers, any guitar you imagine, in order to create these soundtracks that don't really register on a conscious levels. It's very, very important. The sound dimension.
Yeah, it really can change. I didn't actually even realize this until a few years ago when a friend of mine pointed out that if you use major chords in order to make people happy and you use minor chords in order to make people sad, and I became a Titanic Sinclair fan who was partners with this pop musician, Poppy. Mm-hmm. And they used to make these very short videos. And the one that really got my attention was just him playing a major chord and her saying, "Are you happy?" And then him playing a minor chord and her saying, "Are you sad? Are you happy? Are you sad?" Hans Zimmer. Yeah.
Hans Zimmer. I don't think he did the Dark Knight. There's another, but
I don't know.
Hans Zimmer is one of the biggies.
That's
So
the other one that's a
James
biggie.
Newton Howard is also one of the biggies. This is a person he's known in the business, but he's not at that level of recognition. I forgot. I think he has a Norwegian name. I can't remember. I don't have the. I have a bunch of CDs here, you know, at the ready, but I don't think it's in the stack.
CDs. There. Okay, boomer.
Yeah.
But yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Let me tell you, I put them into my iTunes. So
yeah.
But I keep this is going to be currency. When the economy busts out, forget Bitcoins. We're going to trade in CDs and DVDs. This is going to be the currency. That's why I'm hanging on to it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think any kind of tangible media probably might wind up going in that direction. Exactly. Do you think the whole idea is that of cultural amnesia is that human beings will always wind up digitizing everything so that the next time we get hit by a comet, there's nothing to leave behind?
Possibly. They're not going to wipe out the sound memory, though. That's what's so interesting about music. It stays in there. But let me continue on that line that you were talking about. Major chords versus minor chords. I prefer 11th chords. I prefer the ones that are neither major or minor. They're more enigmatic. They're more inscrutable. They're more spacey. And this comes out of the cool jazz era. And before that comes out of the French Romantic tradition. Debussy, Satie, Fauré, Ravel. And I think we need to adopt that sensibility, neither major nor minor, or all of it together in these 11th chords, right? Or beyond the triad, these fourth chordal chords are called Q-U-A-R-T-L. They're stacked differently. They all create a different sort of emotional as well as intellectual response.
Right. Well, if you've seen the demonstrations that some people make where they take a big piece of metal and then they put like white sand on it and then they play different sounds.
Yeah.
The sand will resonate and create different sacred geometric shapes, right?
Absolutely.
And so you have to imagine that when these things are going in your ears and then they're being processed by your brain, that this geometry is manifesting itself inside you and that has some kind of an effect on your energy and the way that you're perceiving things. You literally do feel better in combination with other stimuli when you hear major chords. You feel worse with minor chords. And I'm not sure, how would you describe the feeling of the 11ths?
Romantic, impressionistic, creative and imaginative. What's really awful, though, is the tritone. I mean, the church even proscribed it. It's the devil's interval. And that's what you hear in Black Sabbath, purposely. And a lot of, so-called metal or black metal or death metal, they purposely use that interval in order to disturb us at the molecular level.
And what is the interval?
It's the tritone.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm not a musician, so I just have to ask dumb questions.
Well, you put your first finger on the first fret and your second finger on the third fret with one string down. That's the tritone. I don't know how else. It's an interval.
Yeah, it's interesting with soundtracks. There's one soundtrack which is the Star Trek II Wrath of Khan soundtrack, and if I'm on a deadline, I can finish whatever I'm starting if I put that music on, because there's something about the composition. It's James Horner, I think. In fact, it was James Horner's first big movie. Like, he had done a Roger Corman movie before that, but his break into the big leagues. Was Jerry Goldsmith wasn't available to do Star Trek II Wrath of Khan, so they brought in the new kid, James Horner. And if I'm on a deadline and I need to get something done, that's what I put on.
Well, Peter, that's interesting that you should mention that, because when I'm working in general, I put on film soundtracks, and Elmer Bernstein is my man. I go back a little bit earlier, like from the 50s, and all those great Western epics and and of course, all those instruments were acoustic. They used an orchestra. They brought them down to the Capitol Records music studio in the basement or wherever it is, full symphony orchestra.
Yep.
And all written out, arranged by hand. And
did
and
he do
that way?
Did he do? Did he do the Searchers or How the West Was Won? Or
what did Magnificent Seven? How's
Magnificent?
that?
Oh, Magnificent Seven. Well, that's to this day is a classic soundtrack.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it helps focus me. It helps me get into a zone and move towards it. And the thing is about motion picture soundtracks is that they are supporting the narrative, right? So musically, non-verbally, they have this kind of 3-part story structure thing that they are pushing through. And so you kind of have these high points and low points, and then it builds to a climax and then a happy ending, right? Mm-hmm. And I just find it really fundamentally beneficial to be able to try to get the work done that I'm trying to do.
A lot of the great, and I can't remember their names offhand, but a lot of the great composers, orchestrators, arrangers, and soundtrack writers came from Germany and Austria, and a lot of them settled in the Pacific Palisades area to work in the studios. They thought they were lowering themselves by doing these soundtracks for the movie, because they conceived of themselves as trying to emulate the great orchestral masters of the past, of Germany, of Austria. But ironically, I mean, now, we consider this art. We see this, but they were just seeing themselves as just kind of workmen. It paid very well, but they didn't really conceive of themselves as artists on the scale of Beethoven or Mozart.
Yeah, there's a weird German history in the Pacific Palisades, because the Frankfurt School guys, after they relocated from Frankfurt, Germany to Columbia University when World War II. So they were German Jews. So in 1927, they felt like being Jewish was a bad thing in Germany, and so they moved to Columbia University. When World War II started, they felt like being Germans on the East Coast of the United States was not necessarily a great place to be. So yes, a lot of them came to the Pacific Palisades. I think that Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer lived, I think, within a couple of 100 yards of where Ben Affleck and Matt Damon live right now, and probably within a quarter mile of J.J. Abrams, Steven Spielberg, and Tom Hanks. So,
and which one of them was the music critic?
Theodor Adorno. Theodor Adorno lived on Bundy, very close to
OJ's house,
the O.J. Simpson crime scene, like within a couple of 100 yards.
Yeah, just north of Wilshire, right? Wilshire Boulevard.
Right, exactly,
Bundy,
and that's where Adorno lived. And then I think that who's the guy who did All You Need Is Love?
John Lennon.
No, but there was a college professor who went to UC San Diego.
You mean the book? Is it?
No, there was 3 major guys from the Frankfurt School who moved to California.
Oh, Herbert Marcuse.
Yeah, Herbert Marcuse. Yeah, Herbert Marcuse.
Yeah, I met him in his latter days.
Oh, wow.
Days. Yeah.
Yeah, what was that like?
It's like meeting one of your intellectual heroes. He had piercing blue eyes, and he really, of the Frankfurt School, he is the only guy that really took to American life. He dug it. All the rest of them were just all suit and tie, and they just, oh God, this place is so barbaric. But Theodor Adorno, I'll use the German pronunciation, Theodor Adorno, he was also the musical consultant to who? Thomas Mann.
Thomas Mann. And Thomas Mann lived in the Pacific Palisades.
Dr. Faustus.
Right.
Yes, you're neighbors with all these, the ghosts of all this incredible culture.
Well, I keep telling people that when people, I'm a big Joe McCarthy fan, because I really do believe that there was a concerted effort to take over the media through the culture, and the way that you did that was by corrupting the writers. And so the Coen brothers made to me, it's a subversive film about Hollywood, Hail Caesar. Have you seen that?
No, I have not. I thought you were going to mention that other film. They've done a couple of Hollywood films.
Yeah, but Hail Caesar.
Okay.
The reason that Hail Caesar is subversive, and it was funny because the person who told me that I had to watch the movie was Curtis Yarvin.
Okay.
I told him that I hadn't watched it because Clooney was in it, and he said, "Oh no, I'm sure that this is the most tortured Clooney movie that Clooney's ever made, because they basically made Clooney clown himself in the movie while he was clowning himself in real life." So it's pretty good. No, it's about some communist writers who kidnap a producer. And I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but it's worth watching, and it really does clown on this whole thing. But in the subversive, because Clooney is in it, right? And because again, they're getting Clooney to clown himself and the institutions at the same time.
George Clooney, by the way, he's Hollywood royalty.
Yeah, Rosemary Clooney, right?
Yeah. And his father. I mean, he was a regional broadcaster, but Rosemary Clooney was huge in the 50s, and she would take little George to the studios and hobnob with all the celebs. So he's right where he's been groomed to be.
Yeah, exactly. And if you follow like the work of people like Mark Kulak, then that's just status quo, right? It just happens all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I always, there's an acronym in intelligence for how you recruit people, which is MICE, which is money, ideology, compromise or coercion, or energy or ego. And I always think that the F is missing because, family seems to be a huge part of it. And I wonder whether or not that's a conspicuous omission.
Probably is. Bloodlines is crucial.
Yep.
That's why when I was trying to figure out the occultic nature of the inauguration and the occultic nature of the Trump administration, I did not go to the president of the United States. I went to the matriarchal side. I went to explore Melania Knobs, known as Melania Trump. I think she's got some incredible Central European Slovenian mojo that we need to understand. And my argument is that if we trace that bloodline back to Knobs, and when the Germans took over, they Germanicized their name, because you were talking about passing, right? New York or from wherever. They were trying to pass as Germans, so they changed it from Knobs to Naus. But if we trace back that bloodline there, I think we're going to probably find the secret to the rejuvenation of the American Republic. Because remember, Peter, you're old enough, just like me. That whole area was terra incognita, right? It was like blacked out because of the whole Cold War. It was the Iron Curtain. So only now, myself, am I really beginning to understand this rich confluence of all these different peoples and language groups and religions. I mean, you got the Ottomans, you have the remnants of the Habsburg Empire. You got Mongolians there. I'm sure Melania Trump we share a genetic commonality there. She's got some Mongol in her, Hungarians and all that, the Golden Horde. So that's where I see the news, the second wave of knowledge and information, inspiration is going to come from Eastern Europe and Central Europe.
So do you think that Melania may be Donald's controller?
It's possible. I view her as being more like a redeemer.
Okay.
Yeah. controlling could work both ways, right? I mean,
exactly. Yeah, it's a tool, right?
Yeah. But she's definitely the person who's in the superordinate position in the relationship. But people are looking at, because he's a famor, right? He's always in front of the camera, and he knows how to work it. He's on in these wrestling programs, and he became the number one performer of all, the president of the United States. But it's really the matriarchal bloodlines here that I think will tell make the difference in the story. By the way, she set up an office of the First Lady not too long ago. She didn't set up the office of the ex-First Lady. It's called the Office of the First Lady. So biographers, investigative reporters, creatives, start checking her out. Look at her very closely. Therein lies the secret.
Indeed. I'm at a loss.
Well, should we talk about Franz Kafka?
Franz Kafka.
How's that for a jump cut?
What do you have to say about Franz Kafka?
He was a mensch. Franz Kafka. Yeah, because, we've seen the photos in the picture, and we all read this, right, when we were in college, like, oh, yeah, Kafka-esque, He's entered into the language. But this fellow here, his name's Rainer Stach, this is translated. He did a 3-volume biography of Franz Kafka, but he did a little distillation of, is that Kafka? 99 finds. And this guy was a real player. And he loved life. He loved comedy. He liked going to the cabaret. He liked to drink his beer. He liked to go to these, and he liked his German sausages. And him and his literary executor, Max Brod, they used to go, what is it called, tomcatting? Wench, they used to go to which men of their upper middle class bourgeois background, they did that on a routine basis. So this book covers it all. So it rewrote my understanding of my. It makes me like him even more so because he's more of a human. But
so was Metamorphosis a lampoon?
Yes, he was a comedian. He was a satirist, right? He took what he saw in the cabaret, just a sort of lowbrow humor, let's call it, and he was part of this. And by the way, he was well known in Prague, in Berlin. People like Rainer Maria Rilke would go to his readings.
Right.
So he was not some obscure genius. But the point I was going to make is that he took this, the Tumbler, this character. And he brought in his literary influences to create this art, but I think he was a comedian. He was a satirist, and all the professors got it wrong. They said, "Oh, he's the exemplar of angst and latter day Sturm und Drang and existentialist misery." This is what a Woody Allen type.
But he would have been a National Lampoon writer if he was born.
He would have been. He would have been at home on the staff of Mad Magazine.
It's funny because in Curtis Yarvin's latest posts, he was making reference to Max Worfen, who is the character I believe who's played by John Lithgow in Buckaroo Banzai, which is an obscure reference that I needed to go refresh my my memory of Buckaroo Banzai. I hadn't seen Buckaroo Banzai in a long time. And it's funny because there's a lot of references in that movie. Many of the references I think are Thomas Pynchon references. So the name of the company that the rocket manufacturer in Buckaroo Banzai is Yo-Yo-Dyne, which I believe is a company that is taken out of the Taking of Lot 47. Is that the name of the book?
Right, or Gravity's Rainbow, or V.
Yeah.
One of the early ones. Yeah.
And they're saying there are little sayings in the movie like "the future begins tomorrow" and things like that are taken out, that are Pynchon things, I believe. So so all of this stuff becomes referential, right? And if you if you understand the litany of it, and then how it winds up re-manifesting itself in modern things. I mean, there's lots of examples of this. There's a series called Percy Jackson, where the author very astutely just took all of these Greek myths, like Percy Jackson is actually Perseus, and then just moved them into the modern time. Like, what would a Greek myth look like if it happened, in the 21st century or the late 20th century? What would Perseus drive? Where would he live? where would his parents be?
You see all these monsters and magnificent animals and the chimera in the Greek myths, right? I'd like to see a Greek myth retold today from the POV of a chimera or a chimera. How's that? This sort of man beast, half man, half animal.
But isn't a chimera almost kind of it has some kind of superpower where it's invisible or something? Because I often use the term, or I hear the term being used. It's kind of a chimera with this, like, a mystical thing that you don't really ever really see.
It doesn't. It's disembodied. I think you can still perceive it, but it's a disembodied entity. But
so, what do you imagine that a chimera what would their perspective be on current state of affairs?
I think it would be one of trying to fully assume control. Right now, they only have partial control, but they won't rest. They won't be satisfied until they can inhabit all of humanity. And I think this is politically, this is where we're moving.
Well, isn't that kind of the status quo?
Now, yes, it is. I mean, they haven't quite completed the process, though, and they cannot rest until the circle is closed. It has to be brought to a full resolution to their satisfaction, and we're that close. There's just a narrow gap separating that ring.
Right. Well, my Israeli friends who keep an eye on the Hebrew calendar say that we still have, I don't know, like 180 years to go or something like that. We're like, I don't know what the Jewish year is right now. Maybe somebody can tell us in the chat room. But that would tell us how many more years we have to get to 6,000, which he says is the end time. So,
all right. Well, one of your commenters said that we need Mad Magazine. Someone who in the chat room here,
and we do mean Mad Magazine
and National Lampoon. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we kind of have it with the Babylon Bee now to a certain extent, but what I think that the National Lampoon did better, that there is a writer. And his work is kind of hit and miss. I like him personally. He writes under the nom de plume Delicious Tacos. But his best work, the one that I really like, is called Finally Some Good News. And what I like about him is that he really writes in the style of one of those 1970s National Lampoon writers like Chris Miller or Michael O'Donoghue. And Finally Some Good News is about a guy. So imagine the movie Office Space, where you've got the guy works in the office, and instead of him being in love with having a crush on the waitress in the restaurant, he's got a crush on one of the girls in the office. And then the city that they're in gets hit by a nuclear weapon. And the only two people left unscathed by this thing are him and the girl that he's got a crush on, who now desperately needs him. Like, she wanted to have nothing to do with him before, but now for pure survival's sake. So it's kind of like a cross between Office Space and Swept Away. Mm-hmm. That movie that was remade with Madonna. Mm-hmm. So that has, if you want to go with the National Lampoon sensibility, like, go get Finally Some Good News by Delicious Tacos, because I think supporting people who are doing that kind of work is probably important. Just got to move in that direction.
Well, I will check him out. Now, Tracy, I know that you're very much in tune with the current generation of humorists. Can you give us some references that we can check out We're not going to be able to go to clubs, obviously, because they've shut down the clubs to attack live music, number one, and secondly, comedy. That's what I think is the main focus there, because they disrupt the language. So, Tracy, could you clue us in on some of these happening? I only know the big ones that are shown on YouTube.
Well, who do you already know, Professor? Let's see.
What's that guy who did a show recently in his own mansion? Right, Kevin Hart.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of a post-lockdown show on Netflix, and he's complaining about it, of course, but he's really affirming this whole changeover by saying, because he made his bones in the club with drunks and people who are trying to upstage him, and whoever shows up at these places into his palatial home with a few dozen of his closest friends. So that's the level I only know what's on that shows up on Netflix.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope to convince you that there's reason to be hopeful about what's going on, because there's Russell Brand came to mind when I was thinking through who's making a difference now and being funny. And I think everybody's familiar with him from his acting days, but he's also a stand-up comedian, and now he's hosting a YouTube show, and he's been going after, for the last couple of weeks, the New World Order. He's not calling it that per se, but he's talking about what's going on with the with Klaus. And I think his most recent video was, hey, is all this philanthropy just a tax dodge? I'm serious. He's built a huge audience by being funny, and now that he's got them in there, he can be serious and still be silly about it, but ask serious questions and kind of just be like, I don't know, I'm just this kind of peaceful, because I can't remember if he ascribes himself a religious background, but he's very spiritual and all that. So he's bringing that to the fold, and then plus this kind of like biting sarcasm and questioning. And he's really smart, like shockingly intelligent.
Yeah.
And so I would say I see him as somebody, and Tim Dillon is probably my favorite current comedian, and he skewers everybody. There's no sacred cow. And he's so good at it that even though everything's shut down, his audience has, I don't know, tripled since lockdown. I mean, he pulls down $80,000 a month on Patreon, I think.
My gosh.
Maybe more than that. And he uses a lot of that. He was just talking on his episode that came out, I think, this morning, that he's going to be doing a ton of more video stuff. And so he's made fun of Meghan McCain, but at the same time, he made fun of, I can't remember her name now, Rachel Levine, our new HHS secretary. And he can get away with it because he's gay. So he kind of walks this line where he's like, I'm fat and I'm gay, so I got 2 strikes. Come at me and try to cancel me. I don't care. And that there's a whole group that he's friendly with that have kind of come to that realization that they're going to get canceled just for having opinions that don't go with the flow, but they find the comedians that just kiss up to the throne to be boring. They're not interested in that PC stuff at all. And so the other one I would say is Andrew Schultz, and he's actually got a Netflix special where he kind of did a modern day take on The Daily Show. So it's 4 episodes, but each episode's only about 15, 20 minutes. And some of the writers on that, I think Ben Domenech was one of the writers that's listed in the credits, and maybe some of the guys from Reason. But he hit both sides really hard. But it was just funny and clever, and he's got a big podcast. So I think that when cable television dies, and the platforms that exist, like Netflix and all they've gone super woke. They're not going to give Tim Dillon a special, I wouldn't think, at this point. Everybody's found these new platforms during this time and looked around. So I think, they might get thrown off of YouTube, but they've got their audience that will follow them wherever they go.
And the more people they throw off, the better it becomes for all these alternate platforms, because nature abhors a vacuum. It's like there was a fine line that they're playing there for a long time, where they could maintain their monopoly and marginalize people just enough in order to keep the narrative going in the direction that they wanted to go in. But they're at a point right now where I'm not sure. I think they've lost control. I think the whole deplatforming of Trump, and then that whole massacre that happened that week, really woke a lot of people up, not on the right. It woke a lot of people up on the left. They were like, what? You know, when you've got Angela Merkel questioning Jack Dorsey,
Right.
like, you know, it's not good. So yeah, politics is downstream from culture. And the thing is about comedy is if you can get people to laugh, people are going to be in trouble because that puts it at a different level of being able to communicate. It's getting back to the whole like sacred geometry of shapes of sounds and things like that. It changes the energy of the way that people are perceiving things, and they're really, really threatened by comedy. I think it's why the Daily Show was created in the first place with Jon Stewart. It's like they needed. There was a famous poll that came out about 10 years, I think, after the Daily Show started, that said most people claimed that they got their news from Jon Stewart. Like, how scary is that?
But think about it. The news is not a pleasant thing, right? I know a lot of people that just don't want to watch it because it's all terrible. But if it's presented with humor, it becomes palatable.
Well, you mentioned the Daily Show. I managed to hack that with Jon Stewart a number of years ago. I was complaining of the fact that there weren't any Asian American men in Hollywood. And I said there were also not any Asian American men in erotica, in the porn business, which, Peter, you live very close to. It's right over the hill there, right over the valley. Yeah, Chatsworth. So I did make my own erotica film, and it was picked up by Jay Leno. He put it in the monologue, and it was picked up by the Daily Show. So again, part of it was a lark, part of it was a spoof. But after that, you started seeing people like John Cho or Cal Penn appear in Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, right? So this is a living demonstration of how humor has a subversive as well as a political impact. So any people, the guy that got the job at Hawaii Five-0, you owe me.
I think he was on Lost first, Professor. When did you do this hack?
There you go. Way before Lost.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So you saw that.
Before that, it was Hop Sing on Bonanza, or these guys on Hawaii Five-0. Yes, boss. Yes, Mr. Garrett. But it changed, and it was done through the medium of this, inspired by my mentor Franz Kafka, this sort of arch humor that takes them in an unexpected direction. Let's put it that way.
What was your specialty at Davis? What did you teach?
I was housed in one of those marginalized areas that they only tolerated out of political correctness. It was called Asian American Studies. But very soon they brought in a couple of people there who were part of the so-called National Institute of Mental Health Mafia. And what they were doing was using students as human test subjects to figure out how to reorient them, right? Just neuronally and behaviorally. So
yeah,
this is where I went on the offensive. This is where I started getting in trouble because I was challenging.
Before we go too far, what kind of stuff were they doing, Professor?
They were doing experiments. They called it mental health disparities. And all the different food groups were doing it. There was one guy that was heading up for African Americans. One was in charge of the Latinos. And the guy that I work with, his name's Stan Su, by the way. He works at the same institution as Blasey Ford. It's a Palo Alto University. It's a diploma mill. And it's kind of an academic friend. He works as
it's a CIA recruiting center.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So this guy Stan Su, and I'm mentioning his name because he's a public figure, went over there. But so his job was to do it for the Asian American group, to bring people into the mental health complex, the pharmaceutical complex, and put all my students onto Prozac or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So this is where it started to go south for me. So yeah, some people just don't have a sense of humor, do they?
Yeah, I remember when I was an undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara, I lived very close to the laziness was a major factor for me when I was in university. So cutting through buildings instead of having to walk around them was always a thing. And in the psych department at UC Santa Barbara, there were always the grad students had their offices on the first floor, and they had their little bulletin boards next to their doors where they would have, papers and things for whoever the students were that were in the classes that they were working on. And there were always little signs that said marijuana experiment, or LSD experiment, or psilocybin experiment, paid experiment. And the papers would be cut with the little tear-offs at the bottom, with a phone number on it. And I knew people at UC Santa Barbara that were supplementing their ability to live there by taking drugs. Like, that's what they did. And they were being provided by the psychology department at UC Santa Barbara. So that goes hand in hand with your experience there.
It's the perfect front, and that's why I'm doing this work. I'm calling it collegiate Gothic, because it's a medieval Gothic institution with a techno overlay on it. But make no mistake about it.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Go. I'm sorry.
No, it's a cultic institution.
What do you think about reinstating like schools that were just based on the trivium and the quadrivium, like just taking it back a couple of hundred years, or maybe more longer than that, and just say, okay, we just need a baseline for the way that we learn things?
Well, like Tracy, I also have some good news. It's already happening. There's a resurgence in the study of classics, of medieval history, of the esoteric tradition, mostly Western, but globally, the esoteric tradition. How do I know this? I'm buying these books that are being published by Oxford University Press, Yale University, all the university presses are, and that's kind of the bellwether of where it's heading. So all the 30-year, 40-year tyranny of GLBTQ-oriented studies, right? Queer studies, they call it. That's their name for it, not mine. Queer study. That's going out the window, and they're going back to the trivium and the quadrivium by default, because the students really find it fascinating. And it's because, like the promo you ran, you have all these people like Alex Jones and people who are quote unquote doing woo type of work, has captured the imagination of college age students and below. And some of it's coming from video games too. Some of these role play games are drawn from these classic scenarios of barbarians, of Vikings, and people want to study that. They're pretty much done with that whole 30-40 year reign of foundation funded, DARPA, NATO funded GLBTQ studies, gender ethnic studies. If you're studying that now at the doctoral level, I suggest that you change course immediately and start learning about esoterica, because that's where it's at. And that's going to be where, just like Central Europe, right? Because that's looms are very large in the esoteric tradition, going back to Transylvania and Bram Stoker, the Victorians, the whole Gothic tradition in Ireland and England, the British Isles, all of it, as well as the esoteric traditions from Asia, Africa, Latin America, right? West Africa. I mean, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter is a devotee of Ifa. It's a Yoruba religion that's recognized, comes out of the Caribbean. So, Peter, it doesn't even have to be a conscious effort to restore the trivium. It's happening organically.
Okay.
And why do you think that decision was made, Professor?
Well, there's a book by Frances Stoner, I think her name is, that talked about the cultural engineering on the intelligence agencies, primarily CIA and MI6. And that's where you got entities like the Iowa's Writers Workshop funded by these different fronts. And this went on from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And there's a couple of really good books that have been exposed on that. So once that was played out, then the same foundations and NATO, DARPA, and the intelligence agency brought a number of primarily foreign-born, continental France, German, to a certain extent British, theorists in literary and film studies, and they brought them over here wholesale. They put them in endowed chairs, and they made superstars out of them. Yes, there is a star system in academia. It's Hollywood for ugly people, right? Academia is. And hence we created a 30, 40-year reign of intellectual terror that we are now seeing being played out by all these different, they call it cancel culture. I guess that's what Ye calls it, right? But it really started from this 30, 40-year movement. And that's what I'm writing about in my work that I call collegiate Gothic.
Now, how much would you credit Jordan Peterson with that? I just wonder, because I was so fascinated that here's a professor that is getting millions of people to tune into him, and he's traveling the world and speaking in front of 500,000, if not more people.
I give him less than zero credit. Okay. Yeah, this is a trend that that's been that preceded him by many years, and you're looking at the number one exponent of it. I am probably the only practitioner of New World Order studies. I brought that to the University of California, Davis 15 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, talking about these issues that we're trying to work through today in 2021.
So would you say that Jordan Peterson is talking about the symptoms and you're talking about the causes?
Absolutely. That's a good way of putting it, a succinct way of summarizing his, I mean, I wish him well. I mean, he's represented by the Creative Artists Agency, right? And I can't get arrested, right? Some group decided that they take this guy who's a Canadian subject, right? I'm a third generation American. I can comment on our political system. I think my family has earned that right and that privilege, and they decided to make him an academic superstar. And it's a limited, and I don't mean to focus on him. There's a couple of other people like that, but that's a, as Peter would know, this is what's called a limited hangout.
I just meant it in regards to him kind of reviving the idea of classics and spending a lot of time going through those and mentioning how important they are.
Is looking at lobster studies really a classic?
No, I understand. Like that's the throwaway line from Captain Newman. But
he's a psychologist. He knows a little bit about the classics. I know more about the classics.
Oh, I'm not saying that you don't.
No. I'm not defending myself or attacking him, but he is primarily a behavioral scientist, and I'm an enemy, just like this guy stands here. I'm an enemy of the behavioral sciences. I'm an enemy of psychiatry. I'm an enemy of any type of pursuit that enslaves humanity and prevents them from functioning as sovereign beings. So he's and the reason why I get upset about it, because when on my YouTube channel, I get these comments below that says, oh yeah, you should reach out to Jordan Peterson. He's saying exactly what you're saying. No, he's not. Just because we're from the academic world does not mean we're of the same piece. We're at the opposite ends of the spectrum.
And is that because he practices I'm trying to put a frame on it, because it's interesting that because I've been studying hypnosis for about 3 years now, because Scott Adams talked about it all the time. I thought, well, I actually want to go figure out how this stuff works. And so I'm not a hypnotist, but I wanted to learn how hypnosis works because I wanted to understand how it was being propagated and used against me. And it's interesting because it is a tool, right? And it's hard not to see it once you understand it. And if you, a friend of ours who is a hypnotist said, who's not practicing at this point, I asked him why he wasn't practicing. And he said, it feels kind of rapey, when you're doing it. And I didn't understand until I started to kind of really comprehend and understand hypnosis, that if you are really good at it, if you are really good at being a behavioral psychologist, like you said, and you're practicing, you can make people do things subconsciously that they might not have been inclined to do before. I prefer the route of explaining to people how they've been manipulated and let them come to their own conclusions. But to the extent that it's not possible to learn how it works without knowing how it works, there is some value, I think, to psychology, just to be able to defend yourself from it. But clearly Jordan Peterson has a practice, and people come to him, and then he does use the skills that he's got in order to change their behavior. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about something more insidious. I heard him on in a call-in show, and this turned me off for good, where someone who was in distress and was having, quote unquote depression, whatever that might mean, and no one's really been able to define depression nor mental illness. I
think it's just a lack of happiness myself, but
well, there you go. But anyway, Jordan Peterson told her on air remotely without even sitting down with her, says, well, you need to check out antidepressants. So I thought that was highly unethical, irresponsible, and is really a reflection of his lack of
well, plus if he's an expert, how did he wind up going off, for a year because he was clinically depressed? I mean,
I didn't want to bring that up, Pete. I mean, but yeah, he's taking his own medicine, I guess.
It kind of wrecks your brand,
It certainly does, but it doesn't bother people because you have a large, and I saw this in my students, especially the female ones. The women are always being targeted for these antidepressants. And it bothered me because I've been teaching long enough where I used to see the lights in their eyes shining, and they were just glowing with energy and vibrating. And it just got dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And I traced it to these these people who were in my department who were trying to slap labels on people and pathologize ordinary behavior so that they could be pimped out to the pharmaceutical industry that will make massive profit. And they're also paid consultants for these entities as well.
Well, you bring up a good point too, because I thought, I was married, and then my marriage started to fall apart, and we started going to marriage counseling, and there's this weird conceit in marriage counseling that the individuals are not the patients, that the relationship is the patient. And the problem that I have with that is that sometimes one person's behavior is just not good, right? And they need to be called out on it. And if you're dealing with the relationship instead of like two individuals that are trying to work it out, then it winds up becoming problematic and it doesn't work. And I started, and I, just with my cursory understanding of psychology and the stuff that I learned from in college and the things that I've read in books, a lot of times I felt like I was more equipped to be dealing with the conversation than the people that we were paying. And it started making me wonder whether or not there was a correlation. I've never gone to check this out, but maybe somebody wants to research this. The number of LCSWs, which are licensed clinical social workers, which is the license that you get to be a marriage counselor, and the divorce rate. Because my guess is that they track, okay, that there is a correspondence there, that the more family therapists you wind up having in society, the more divorces you wind up having. Because I don't think they prevent divorce. I think that they just facilitate it and manage it. So sidebar, sorry.
Not a sidebar. It's what's happening to us right now as we speak. And there are people within the profession themselves who have left it. I mean, they're still being subsidized by us through the insurance industry, right? That's one of the reasons why they want to keep maintaining these billable hours. But in order to keep the pipeline going, they need people like me as an intake valve to tell students who are supposed to be confused at that age and trying to grapple with who they are in this crazy mixed up world. They expect me to facilitate this process of induction into the mental health system, and I refused to do it. I said, "You're perfectly okay. Don't trust the experts. They might have a white jacket on. And whatever you do, never volunteer to be a human test subject in any university subsidized experiment, behavioral or otherwise. And don't volunteer at the primate lab either, because all it takes is a little bit of the monkey spit on you and you're going to be dead. And same with the rat labs." So when I'm lecturing
that's what the Chinese are for, Doc.
Exactly. Right. We have expendables, and what they've done is export a lot of these experiments overseas, China and India and parts of Africa, because the public became gradually aware of the pharmacide that's taking place, and the role that the APA, the American Psychological Association, has played in the debasement of American society, culture, and politics. I mean, the fact that the APA would not denounce torture at Guantanamo until their feet were held to the fire, so to speak, speaks volumes about the bankruptcy of this professional organization.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned insurance companies too, because I'm reading a book that was recommended by Richard Grove and Jay Dyer called "A Man Called Intrepid," by this guy William Stevenson, who was basically the go-between, the head of British intelligence, who was going between FDR and Winston Churchill during World War II. And one of the book is filled with these like throwaway lines that he writes, like it's one sentence, like it's no big deal to him, but like has such huge ramifications. He was talking about insurance companies, and he said that the part of the way that they figured out what the most vulnerable parts of the German infrastructure was during World War II was by breaking in or getting access to the German insurance company records, because the things that the insurance companies felt like were the most risky things were the things that opportunists would be able to take advantage of in order to create the most amount of damage. And so when you look at people like Warren Buffett, who's very involved in the insurance industry, and you think of insurance companies as a type of intelligence agency, that's basically the actuaries and the people who are determining what the actual risk assessment is for any particular policy that you're writing, probably have more domain understanding and intelligence on that particular segment than any other human beings on the planet. So if you have access to that kind of information and you're trying to run some kind of a direct action operation, whether or not it's psychological or kinetic or whatever it is, insurance companies seem to be a very interesting vector. And I would have never thought about that until he just had that throwaway line in the book. And it was like, wow.
May I follow up on that?
Sure, go ahead.
Remember the Secretary of Transportation, Norman Mineta?
I don't.
Around 9/11, he's the one that reassured the Arab and the Muslim community that, don't worry, you're not going to be rounded up, because my people were done wrong in World War II. That's why he was put in that position, by the way, because they knew that the operation was about to unfold. He started out here as a legislator in the state of California and later became part of the cabinet, DC. But he was the Secretary of Transportation in 9/11. Where he, and again, this goes back to family lines and the bloodlines, where he got his start was his father was an insurance man who had no background. And he was approached by some other guy, not Japanese American, because it would be kind of creepy, right? So they set his father up as an insurance man in the San Jose Bay Area. And he had the inventory of all these people who have accumulated some real estate, some holdings. He had a complete inventory of their household, their belongings, and their bank accounts, so that when the internment came around World War II, thanks to Theodore Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt, he could hand that inventory over.
And
They were
Earl Warren.
expropriated. Pardon me?
And Earl Warren.
And Earl Warren, yes.
Yeah.
So the governor of California at the time,
Right.
later Supreme Court justice.
And
So you're right about that.
And the JFK cover-up.
Absolutely, the Warren Report.
Right.
So yes, insurance companies are crucial. They're key in the intelligence network. Brilliant.
Yep. So I do recommend this book again, just because of the number of throwaway lines in it that he just kind of goes, oh yeah, well, we did this and did that. And it was like, for example, I didn't know this before, and maybe I should have, because it's the name of a famous James Bond book, but who does the head of British intelligence report to in the British government, according to William Stevenson?
Mm-hmm.
The sovereign. So the head of British intelligence doesn't report to the prime minister. The head of British intelligence reports to the sovereign.
So this harkens back to your previous talks about Dr. John Dee.
Indeed.
Correct?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And William Donovan, Wild Bill Donovan, wasn't he tutored by William Stevenson, the man called Intrepid?
Yeah, they called them Big Bill and Little Bill.
Okay.
Bill Donovan was Big Bill, and Little Bill was William Stevenson.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and the advertising business industry, Madison Avenue, which Mad Magazine skewered relentlessly, that is a branch of intelligence, of propaganda, correct? Those are the madmen of Madison Avenue.
Well, I haven't gotten there yet in my research, but maybe you could.
Though, because remember I told you, Peter, that I had read that book, and now the name's going to escape me, but about Roald Dahl, and it was called The Irregulars, and Roald Dahl was a spy.
Roald Dahl is all over this man called Intrepid book.
But one of the other guys with him was David Ogilvy of the Ogilvy marketing firm.
Interesting.
Ogilvy and Mather.
Right. Oh, and David Ogilvy was one of my heroes when I was in the advertising business. He wrote a book, Ogilvy on Advertising, which was, if you got hired by the agency, the first thing they did is that they gave you a copy of the book and they told you to come back to work after you'd finished it.
Right. And a lot of people who became superstars in American letters had their start in advertising. Case in point, Joseph Heller with Catch-22. He was an ad man. And he never really wrote anything good after Catch-22. I think it was a composite of any number of memoirs of people from the OSS, and they wrapped it up into Catch-22. Him, and there's a couple of other people of that generation of the immediate post-war that ran through the advertising agency. Now I guess they're being run through Silicon Valley or Netflix.
And Catch-22 took place in Italy, right? The bombers, the B-25 bombers, were in Italy
for the most part, and they had a prototypical character. And our friend and colleague George Webb talks about this character type all the time. But that character in Catch-22 is Milo Minderbinder. Remember him? He's the guy that sold everything.
Yes,
to both sides. It doesn't matter, from nylon stockings to unexploded ordnance to either side. So. Yeah, they were really kind of the OS people who got together in their little clubby atmosphere and had Joseph Heller front for them and write their memoirs and throw it in our face and laugh at us about this was what World War II was really about. Ha ha ha! The joke is on you.
Yeah, well, I wonder if Heller worked with. I think Angleton was in Italy at that time, and I think Donovan was in Italy at that time.
Yeah.
So,
and then you can do a hop, skip, and jump over to Switzerland, and you'll find Alan Dulles.
Yep, exactly. Right. Talking to Reinhard Gehlen, and
So the book there is Frances Stoner, I think her name. There's two names I can't remember, but and there's a more recent book that I can remember the title, and I don't know the author. It's called Finks, and that is the whole expose of how post-war literature, I'm talking about high literature, not Mad Magazine or Mass Market, Louis L'Amour or Mickey Spillane. I'm talking about the people who are doing literature, right? And they've set up the Iowa Writers Workshop. People like Kurt Vonnegut, who Peter Tracy, you recognize his name, right, from another related constellation, his brother, right? but it was all a synthetic.
What about his brother?
Yeah.
Vonnegut's brother was an engineer, and some of his concepts, Vonnegut's concept, like Ice 9, right, freezing up an entire body. Yeah, that was all stuff that his brother was workshopping.
For the audiences who aren't familiar, the MacGuffin in the book Cat's Cradle is that there is a scientist that's basically Albert Einstein, and he's in a meeting with a Marine general one day who says that the Marines hate more than anything else is slogging through the mud, and it's too bad that you can't develop a device that would prevent Marines from having to slog through mud. And so he goes back to his nuclear particle accelerator and he puts a dandelion in it, I believe, and creates a new molecule of water that's called Ice 9. And the only difference between it's H2O, but because of the molecular configuration of it, the only difference between Ice 9 and regular ice is that the melting point is like 120 degrees instead of 32 degrees. And so if you took a piece of Ice 9 and you dropped it into the swamp, it would make the swamp hard because it would turn it into ice that wouldn't melt until it was 120 degrees. The problem is that the swamp is attached to the river that's attached to the spring, and that would all turn into Ice 9, and the swamp would go out into the ocean, and then the ocean would turn into Ice 9. And so if you actually ever did drop a piece of Ice 9 into a swamp, you would end life on the planet as we know it. And it would make a big noise. I think it was harumph or something like that.
It was Vonnegutian, that's for sure. Well, Peter, I can tell that you did your extracurricular reading as an undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara while smoking a joint and reading your Kurt Vonnegut. I think we were all doing that back then.
Yeah, I think I got started with Vonnegut early. There was a guy named Scott Barish I went to high school with who turned me on to Vonnegut, and I started reading it in high school.
There you go. Now there was a version of that was put into practice in the Vietnam jungles. I think that was really what the hidden message there, and it's called Operation Popeye. It's an early version of weather warfare where they were creating mud on the so-called Ho Chi Minh Trail. So Vonnegut had an entry point through his brother, who was a physicist. I don't know if he was a PhD, but he was an experimental laboratory physicist who was getting all the goodies from, I don't know if DARPA was around back then, but through the Pentagon, that research there. And time and time again, you'll see that connection.
Right. And Neil Stephenson has very similar correspondences. I mean, if you take a look at, his book Snow Crash or Diamond Age, a lot of the things that were manifest in those books. And Snow Crash was written it was published like 3 years before the World Wide Web came out. Mm-hmm. And he had people living, the economy of the United States had collapsed and people were living in shipping containers and they were wearing goggles on their head in order to experience the universe because their real world lives, IRL lives sucked. Mm-hmm. And so there's you start to look at a lot of the themes in Kurt Vonnegut books and how they were mapping to the kind of zeitgeist of the time. And then you look at Neil Stephenson's parents, his father, I believe, was an electrical engineer. He might have worked on the Manhattan Project, and his mother is a research psychologist who specialized in group experiments.
Yeah. And before that, you had William Gibson. Today we have Max Brooks, who's the son of Mel Brooks, of all things, but he's Hollywood royalty. And his mother is Anne Bancroft, and he's the guy that attained glory and fame through his whole zombie series, right? And that's Max Brooks. These guys were all read into some part of the program to preview it as entertainment for the rest of us.
Right. Here's some ideas for you. Do a good job on it. We'll make sure that it's popular.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then when it happens, people go, "Oh, that's just like the movie." Right? It's irreal. It's not real. It's irreal. Irreality becomes the norm.
Irreality? That's a good word. I haven't heard it before.
I think it's in the dictionary someplace. If not, it should be.
Oh, I believe you. But the question is it later than 1920?
You know, it probably. I was talking to John B. Wells last night, and he mentioned Jules Verne. I think it was starting during the whole scientific revolution, the revolution in laboratory sciences. He was read in. All these guys are part of sworn brotherhoods. They're part of these
H.G. Wells.
Yeah, they're all part of these Gnostic lodges. And these are the people who are, and the French, we talk about Jules Verne, they have 6 academies. You're talking about the trivium and the classical knowledge. They've got that white, it never left. Just for the aspirational middle class. Those are the ones who are getting all the GLBTQ studies. But the trivium and the good stuff, the classics and the Académie Française and all the other 5 entities there that cover the music, all the different, the classic arts, music, geometry, and rhetoric. That's never left.
For the people who are born without birth certificates, right?
Exactly. They're born with, probably Rh negative blood. That's about all they need.
Indeed.
Is that really all it takes?
Blue bloods. Pardon me?
Is that really all it takes? Yeah,
blue bloods. It's a certain, some people say it's part reptilian. Some people, the brightest minds haven't been able to figure out the anomalies, but apparently there's empirical truth through the Rh negative thesis.
Well, yes. I have my blood test in the kitchen. I haven't done it yet. So, but my family is mixed enough that I'm pretty sure that I couldn't be Rh negative, because that's part of the reason that they're so crazy about the bloodlines, right? They can't mix. You can't mix with somebody who's not Rh negative, because that will screw the whole line, right?
Well, they won't be able to carry the baby to term because they're rejecting the fetus.
Apparently, they can carry one baby.
Oh, one only?
Yeah, and then what happens is that the body builds up an immune reaction.
Okay.
The woman's body builds up an immune reaction, and then she can't carry it again.
So an heir, but no spare.
An heir, but no spare.
That happened quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, this is why Princess Diana is rumored to have to go outside of the family, that bloodline, to take up. And this is done commonly along royal lines. They always have a cadet line, right? And these are the bastards that help to keep them from going full reptilian, right? And that's where you have all these wars, because, hey, listen, I may be a bastard, but I'm really the legitimate heir to that throne, and I'm going to take it from you. And then they round up the rest of the, we peasants to fight their wars for them. So, yeah, that's why they're called blue bloods.
Indeed. We've gone off on a rabbit trail.
Yeah, but we had predicted that was coming.
Indeed, and I think we're ready for it, because I had another question for Dr. Hamamoto. By the way, I spent a few hours with Ryan Dawson and Addie Ads 2 days ago, and I don't know if you know Ryan Dawson is. He's a lightning rod dissident who lives in Japan, and has been way ahead on Epstein and 9/11 and a lot of truth, I would call truth movement kind of things. He's got some very I would say deliberate opinions about things. I'm not sure that I 100% foursquare with him, but I think he's an important voice. And he was talking about he lives in Japan. And he was talking about.
Could you tell me where in Japan? And I can let you know if there's a U.S. military and intelligence base nearby. Japan is riddled by them.
Yeah, I believe you. I will talk to you about it, but not on a live stream.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Right.
To
remember Lee Harvey Oswald, Atsugi.
I do. I do. And
Okay.
I do. And I hear you loud and clear, Doctor.
Okay.
I, doctor.
All right.
So where was I going? Ryan was talking about the name, the Yamamoto. He was talking about how the Yamamotos are in control of Japan, and but they didn't come from Japan. That they actually came from Korea.
Yes.
And so I was wondering whether or not Hamamoto is a variation of Yamamoto, and if there was anything that you could share about that.
Yama means mountain. Hama means beach.
Okay.
So we're at the opposite ends of the geographic spectrum. Moto means origins.
Okay.
So we're from the beach, seagoing. So my people were fishermen. Yama, those people were whatever up there, up in the mountains.
Right. And so they called Korea like the mountain country, according to Ryan. So,
but that the whole Korean origins of the Japanese imperial line is commonly accepted by scholars, because look at Japan. It's just an island, and it was part of the Asian mainland at one point. So the modern tension between the Korean Peninsula and Japan is sort of like just like in Britain, it's sort of family war. It's a family feud.
Indeed. All right. So to my question, which is, I had mentioned when we were in San Diego, I had mentioned this book, which is the Wall Street Trilogy by Anthony Sutton, where Anthony Sutton documents the financing of the New Deal, the Third Reich, and the Soviet Union. And the evidence in this book is that they were all financed by Wall Street. And he names the bankers and the banks and the deals and how the deal structures were put together and all of those other things. But the word that doesn't appear in this book is Japan. And we all know that World War II took place all over the world. And so to buy into Sutton's thesis, there was a big piece of the puzzle missing for me, which was how did the Japanese get financed, and what was the kind of the economic politics of the East that was going on? And you said, well, I know the answer to that question. And then we had to get in cars and get on airplanes and stuff, and we never got to finish. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Well, in our conversation, Peter, we talked about this documentary. You asked me if I'd seen Princes of the Yen, right? It's a really good one. It's on YouTube. But I had done a lot of study on the topic in English language transition. I don't read Japanese. I was there, however, in 93, 94 as a Fulbright scholar. I was there also in 2003, 2004 in Okinawa, where all the military intelligence is. So I've had some experience there. And my background is Southern Japanese, Okinawa and Hiroshima area there. And the irony, and we were talking between us before the show, Tracy and Peter and me, about the irony of this trilogy, which is canonical for people who really want to understand world history through finances. Anthony Sutton was housed at the Hoover Institution, which is facing the Pacific Ocean. University of California itself, they at least acknowledge it, because the portal to the University of California was through Phoebe Hearst was deliberately oriented to face the Philippines, because the University of California is Yale East, and Stanford is also was positioned there in order to exploit the riches of Asia. But as you pointed out, Peter, Sutton misses that entirely. So this is where Professor Hamamoto comes in. I'm bringing in the other part of the world in the New World Order theory that primarily focuses on Europe, partially the Mediterranean area, not enough from what I can see, Central Asia, right, which is also part of my scope of interest. It's going to be crucial. It already is crucial to the whole Belt and Road, Silk Road initiative that's going to be re-stimulating the economy and perhaps transforming human civilization the world over. That's why I got into Asian American studies 30 years ago, because I could understand the demographics. I knew where the society, the economy was heading, right? I grew up when everybody drove a Chevy or a Ford. I'm talking about the working class people, not the ones that were driving Cadillacs and Lincolns. I grew up in that milieu, and I also grew up when I saw it change into the, cars, Volkswagen and Toyotas, or Datsuns as they were called back then.
My first car.
Yeah, there you go. So I could read the tea leaves, so to speak. And so I've spent my entire professional life positioning myself for this phase here. And I'm going to be producing a radio program, a show, media, mixed media, whatever it is, and sell it to syndication. And it's going to have that Pacific Rim orientation, but with the whole weight of the Western tradition behind it. So I'm really kind of pushing forward the worldview of the Yale Illuminati. But
so you're gonna synthesize the answer to my question and then turn it into media.
Yes, yeah, and also come up with new discoveries.
Okay,
to unearth new. Well, not so new now. For example, who really financed American politics, especially Republican politics, in the post-war period? Well, could it have been as Sterling Seagrave argues, and Peggy Seagrave argues, that it was done from the stolen wealth of Southeast and East Asia? It's colloquially known as Yamashita's gold, right?
Right.
A lot of that money was brought in and helped get Richard Nixon elected.
It's a major part of the book Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson.
Well, yeah, there you go. And he got it from anecdotal information. He probably got it from Gold Warriors by Sterling Seagrave. And those stories, those tales have been around for ages. But until the Seagraves came along, it had never really been documented and put in that type of form. That's just one very dramatic example of how a New World Order theoretical approach, which I have pioneered and so far am the sole practitioner of it in the academic world, right? But that's going to change, just like we're bringing back all the new esoteric medieval classical studies.
Well, it's hard to maintain your status with grants and things like that in that system, though, right? It's like if you want to write about that stuff, you're not going to get promoted, you're not going to get paid. In fact, you're probably going to get kicked out.
Grants are out. Yeah, I'll tell you, I didn't get a raise for the past 10 years. The last 10 years of my career, I never got a single raise from Stan Sue or Nolan Zane or Richard Kim, because I was blowing their cover.
Right.
But I wrote a book instead about them. It's called Servitors of Empire. It's how the Oriental people, the Asian Americans, as like to call themselves, allowed themselves to be used and played as the servitors of this system, thinking that they're going to get over on that basis, only they're going to find out they're going to get rolled over or rolled up at the end.
So
I got my payback.
And that's a pattern, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's biblical at a certain level. It's like, that pattern has been reproducing itself over and over and over again. It's the I don't know. It's almost a cliche, but you're dealing with people's lives and livelihoods and.
Right. And now it's the Latino turn. This is why, we're seeing, and again, this is to distract us, the fact that a new servitor class is being brought in illegally, of course. It doesn't really matter. And they're going to be set up in order to take the ball the next step. It was your Asians who did it up. They help, when you go to the hospital, to the pharmaceutical dispensary, it's mostly Asian American, right? The medical schools, just tons of them coming from India, China, whatever. Very few of them are native born. Most of them are second generation or from overseas. In order to put this psychopharmaceutical complex in motion and to move it forward on behalf of the banking industry, which is in essence the insurance and the health combine, right? The NIH and all of that. So the next phase, the Belt and Road phase, will be there's going to be a new class. There already is in formation a new class of servitors who are of a Latin background, Hispanic, Latino organization. So you're going to see already university presidents, corporate chieftains who are going to be Latinas or Latinos in order to help pave the way and to kind of give the false signal that, hey, you've made it now. You're going to, but then You're going to be rolled up just like everybody else.
I have a question for you, Professor. What was the first day of class like in your New World Order lecture series?
Pretty wild, because I would show excerpts of Endgame by Alex Jones, who Peter features in his video clip there, and from the jump, they got the idea that this is not some easy A course where they get to explore their ethnic identity and find out about the Asian American plight in America. No, mother, you're going to learn about the real roots of oppression. The reptilians. No, I'm just kidding about that. I don't go to the reptilian part. It's not necessary. But yeah, I show them clips of a lot of unorthodox videos. I show them clips from Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. I was talking about the vaccine stuff, vaccination scourge 10 years ago. And that doesn't really fly, the University of California, that workshops that and promotes it, and now requires all incoming students to have their vaccine schedule, all filled out. And I'm sure it's going to happen to the staff and faculty next, because they always hold back a certain group, and until the end, they're going to get it too. So
they're going to get the big needle.
They're going to get the big needle. And it's going to come as an utter shock to them. They should have been auditing my lectures 10 years ago.
Yeah, nobody ratted on you? There weren't any super triggered students?
No, they loved it. In fact, speaking of triggering, that's where they brought in all the therapists came in to neutralize me. Not only did I put out a work for University of California attorneys that rake me over the coals for 2 out of 3 years in hearings. There were kangaroo courts. 4 of them resigned. They were sent straight in there to get Hamamoto, courtesy of Big Sister herself, Janet Napolitano, who was the president of the University of California. But they had to send all these psychotherapists, these MFCC types, to my department to neutralize me. They even put one of them in a faculty office right down the hall from me.
He crazy.
Oh, yeah. And they said, oh, yeah, we're going to get that Hamamoto. He's blowing our cover. I said, you're damn straight. That's what I was hired for. Pardon me?
The chat's asking, oh, sorry. What was the name of the title of the class?
It was called Introduction to the Asian American Experience. So they thought they were going to get some warm fuzzies. But no, they got the bejesus scared out of them. I think.
So you clickbaited your students?
Well, no, that's the course that was already on the books.
That's what I'm saying.
No. I used that shell for my own purposes. But you see, that's the only way I know how to get over, Pete. You know, I mean, if I
you know what, I got to tell you just that idea, the log line on that idea. I mean, I and God bless his soul, I can imagine Robin Williams or somebody like that being cast in this idea of a professor who wakes up one day, figures out what he's been told to teach isn't true, and then he just totally changes the syllabus and the curriculum for his class. I mean, does that happen a lot? Do people do that?
Well, that's why I'm the first and the only progenitor of New World Order studies, because no one's followed me yet, but they are beginning to take part of my act. Speaking of Robin Williams, I reworked the curriculum on the basis of 3 individuals. 1, George Carlin, number 2, Robin Williams, and 3rd, Spalding Gray. Those are my 3 pedagogical influences that helped my reawakening. It helped me transition. I studied their work, their craft very carefully. And I said, hey, I can do this in my lectures of 300 undergraduates.
I have an obtuse Robin Williams story that both of you guys might enjoy, and that is at one point in time, I was working for Joel Schumacher at Universal, and one of the things that they wanted me to do, that this happens all the time when you're working for producers, they drop a stack of scripts on your desk, and they want you to read them, and they pay you to read them, but you have to go read them, and then they want notes. And when you give them notes, there's like a standard form that you fill out, and because they want to, they don't want to spend their time reading the scripts. They want the people working for them to read them first and decide whether or not they like it. So this script got dropped on my desk one day, which was Good Morning Vietnam. And I had a negative, I read it. I was kind of a Vietnam, I was in the apocalypse now kind of camp of, this is my perception of what's going on in Vietnam. I read the book. I read the script. I didn't really like it. I gave it some negative notes. And then the movie came out and it was a giant hit. And my friend Mario that worked in the office with me just started trolling me because he remembered, how badly I had savaged that screenplay. And then I went back and looked at the screenplay after I saw the movie. There was no dialogue in that movie that was in the screenplay. Like Robin Williams completely riffed that whole movie, right? And I can't remember who the director was of the movie, but I saw him interviewed later saying that Robin Williams was uncontrollable. And I had personal experience because I was the first photographer on the first comic relief HBO series, which was raising money for America's homeless. And Robin Williams was one of the guys who was one of the talent. And I had to shoot pictures of him. And this was film. And this was not autofocus cameras. And this was like, he was a very, very, I think I got one really, really good picture, which I posted, I think, on my Flickr and on the day that he died with him and Dick Van Dyke. But there was nothing in that movie that had anything to do with what was written on the screenplay. And
Robin Williams is in a category all to himself. I was thinking just coincidentally today that I want to write a little book. There's this series published by, I think, Bloomsbury Press. It's called 33 and a Third. And it's a small book and it's about classic albums. Like I was listening to D'Angelo's Voodoo. And so they just concentrate, or they have one on the Who with Tommy or Quadrophenia. So I said, I want to do a book like that. The book would be Reality. What a concept. Does that ring a bell, Peter?
Yes, it does. It resonates with me. Does it resonate with you, Tracy?
Sure.
I have a question about, do you know Servando Gonzalez?
Sounds familiar. I don't know him personally.
Servando Gonzalez is an academic. He wrote he graduated, he was educated at the University of Havana in the beginning of Castro. So his parents were pre-Castro and he was Castro. And so he would come home every night and have discussions with his parents about what he was learning in school as opposed to what their experience of the world was. And then he escaped the United States and found out that the narrative about Cuba was actually a third story. So he had the Castro story, he had the pre-Castro story, and then he had the American story. And that kind of led him off into this journey of discovery. And his contention is that the New World Order is so pervasive that even the sources that we look at that we think of as quote unquote being on our side, that many of them are compromised. And his litmus test was whether or not they would actually ever use the term New World Order or any of the kind of associated terms. And the list of people that he gave that we'll never talk about, or actually it was Counts on Foreign Relations was his litmus test. So people who would never talk about the Counts on Foreign Relations, Rush Limbaugh would never talk about the Counts on Foreign Relations. Mark Levin will never talk about the Counts on Foreign Relations. David Horowitz, our friend, will never talk about the Counts on Foreign Relations. And that was always kind of his litmus test to see whether or not an outlet was controlled or part of the problem. And what do you think about that analysis?
As you're speaking, I do know who Servando Gonzalez is because I have his book about the Castro element of the JFK assassination.
Okay.
It's excellent. It's an excellent book because I have read previous books talking about the perception of the CIA of Cuban intelligence. They had the highest regard for Cuban intelligence, which I always found strange because I was just going off the Hemingway images, right? And, our whole image of the Rockefeller friendship with Latin America and all that.
And having Castro over to his apartment or his house every time he came to New York.
Yes. Well, Servando Gonzalez says that Castro was a CIA asset from the get-go.
And he provides plenty of evidence. I mean, one of the things that I love about Gonzalez's books is that he cites the crap out of everything.
Yes. And you know what? He lives not far from me in the South Bay.
Well, if you can hook it up, I will come up there to shoot. He was living in Marin for a while, but he told me that he moved. But if you can hook it up, I'll come up there and shoot photographs of both of you.
Wonderful. And Peter, since we're on the California theme right here, did you know that much of the state of California is still owned by La Familia Castro?
No, but
of the same Fidel Castro bloodline. I have the book on it. They have a whole family reunion deal. Not only that, but Fidel Castro descends from the House of Farnese. And the House of Farnese yielded 2 popes in their family line. He's got the Farnese profile, as does the current Prime Minister of the British Commonwealth of Canada, Justin Trudeau.
And were those occult popes?
Oh no! They were well known. I can't remember what.
No, I know they were well known, but there's another author whose book I haven't finished, Michael A. Hoffman, who wrote The Occult Takeover of the Vatican. I can't remember. I can't remember the title of the book. It's all about the Medicis and the basically the Freemasons taking over the Catholic Church.
Oh yeah. Well, the Farneses were in the mix there. I think they had. I can't remember which ones they were. When you said occult, there are typically 2 popes. You know that, right? There's the Black Pope, and then there's so-called Black Pope. Like in World War II, it was Pedro Arrupe. And actually, there's 2 popes right now, right?
Right. So how does that work? The Black Pope and the White Pope.
Well, I think one is in place for largely ceremonial purposes, and the other one is really doing the skullduggery. They're the fix. They're the one that goes out there.
The literal skullduggery.
Yes. Unfortunately, yeah.
No, which one is it that we see on television?
Oh, we see the ceremonial one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying the Black Pope is in the shadows.
Right. By the way, there's a really good feature film with Jonathan Pryce and Anthony Hopkins, 2 incredible acting talents, about the 2 popes. I think it was on Netflix, and they almost had me. I said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. It was so well done, so well written. Peter, it followed the formula, not yours, but what you've talked about, the ladder of yes. They almost had me to the top rung. Jonathan Pryce, Anthony Hopkins, the 2 popes, because they're trying to rewrite the history and our reception and our understanding of it.
Okay,
now, would you agree with this, that the Black Pope runs the Jesuits? Amongst
other, and people are really focused on the Jesuits, but there are any number of orders. There's the La Salle, and he was the sort of the saint of education. There's the Dominicans, and on and on and on. So as part of New World Order theory and studies, part of my task here is to broaden the scope instead of just keep talking about the Rothschilds, the Freemasons, the blah, blah, blah. Woo. I mean, we've seen all those YouTube deals. I'm gonna plow some new territory here. The Lassallians are really crucial, especially in places like New Orleans.
Is there a LaSalle University there?
Pardon me?
Is there a LaSalle University there? Because I know there's one in Philadelphia, but
yeah, they're kind of like the Jesuit colleges. They have them here and there, right? But Peter, we were talking about music. One of the great alchemists of sound, 2 of them actually, is Brian Eno. He comes right out of the LaSalle School, and then his disciple, what's his name? He has a studio in New Orleans. He's the guy that produced U2 and all these other incredible.
Robert Fripp?
Not Robert Fripp. He produced this album. I'm studying this. I just got this. Daniel Lanois.
Okay.
Yeah, he's Acadian. He's Cajun. There's a whole history. This is part this
Well,
is why I want to.
didn't Brian Eno also design the bong when we start our Macintoshes? The bong.
He did.
I
Yeah.
think he did. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He's a sound designer, and it comes from the occultic sonic alchemy that I think Daniel Lanois was read into.
Well,
There
I don't know if you.
carrier waves that are on these recordings that we can't even detect.
Yep.
But he's good, no doubt about it. But there's a sonic alchemy at play.
Yep. I don't know if you follow the work of Robert Edward Grant, but I mention him sometimes on this show, and he's done quite a bit of work synthesizing sacred geometry with music theory. It's very interesting.
I can't remember his name. There's an individual. I don't know what he does. I think he's a medical doctor. He's professionally, and he's an amateur saxophone player. And he figured out that the Coltrane changes, as in John Coltrane. And John, towards the end, he was really into the avant-garde music. He completely left the tonal system altogether and went into pure sound, pure noise, if you will. But this guy broke it down. John Coltrane, it was all Pythagorean. So John Coltrane was probably inducted to some of the mysteries. And I'm guessing that it was probably Prince Hall Freemasonry. Absolutely. Yes.
All right. I think we should probably open it up to questions because we got about 15 minutes left.
And I noticed one person who had commented that we were going to be talking about comedy, and
oh my gosh! Well, this is the human comedy.
We jumped off the subject. I apologize for that.
That's all right.
We did talk about Mad Magazine a little bit. I think they nailed it. And Tracy talked about three promising talents there.
That's right. And I talked about delicious tacos, which
there you go.
You know,
is there an esoteric meaning behind that name?
I think I think that when he started, Chris Miller in the 1970s could put his name on it and have people buying him drinks at the bar for being such an edgelord, but I don't think you can get away with it anymore. And I think that he just made that name up because he knew that if he wrote that, what's the funniest book about MK Ultra?
I'd say Catcher in the Rye.
Really? You think that's about MK Ultra?
Yeah.
Huh.
Before it was called that. Yeah.
Interesting. I was going to say the Unabomber's Manifesto.
Oh, yeah, great book by Alston Chase, Harvard and the Unabomber. And by the way, Theodore John Kaczynski, I refuse to call him the Unabomber because that's what they want us to call him. Theodore John Kaczynski, I've read all his works. He's a brilliant social theorist. I don't agree with his solutions, but he's brilliant.
Yeah, that's always the thing with him. It's like it's always about the solution. Ryan Dawson refers to him as Uncle Ted whenever he talks to him.
Yes, I did too, ECAT.
I hated all J.D. Salinger. I didn't know why until I read all the material that was coming out on him.
And what did that lead you to conclude?
I thought he was a thebophile. I thought it was creepy, like the Franny and Zoe and A Perfect Day for Banana Fish. I thought, talk about rapey. I had an unclean feeling after reading this stuff. And this is when I didn't know anything. I was an undergraduate or something. And come to find out, he used his literary celebrity in order to bring teenage girls up to his Connecticut farm or wherever he was to seduce them. He was kind of like Keith Raniere in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's on the same. The story is quite the same there, but Bukowski was very popular at a certain point, and right. That movie Barfly was made with Mickey Rourke and Faye Dunaway, I think, and I all my friends were reading Bukowski, so I picked up a Bukowski book and I read it, and I read this one essay called The Fiend, and I felt raped by reading it, and it's just a disgusting first person story about a child molester. And I'm still let me back up. I think that I understand why things like that become popularized now, because they're kind of trying to destroy our moral fiber by normalizing us to, excuse my French, fucked up shit, you know?
Absolutely.
And so, like I've never been a fan of Bukowski. And I think that people who are fans of him are largely just LARPing.
Yeah. Well, I've read most of all of it because I went to Cal State Long Beach. He was big there. There was a professor there named, I can't remember his name, but he was intimate of Bukowski. And Bukowski lived in like Skid Row and before Long Beach got revived. It was a pretty seedy downtown area. So I read a lot of the books, and it was published by a publishing house up in your area when you were in Santa Barbara called Black Swallow Press. I think it was in operation while you were an undergraduate. So I thought it was interesting from a publishing angle. The only positive takeaway that I ever got from Charles Bukowski is his reference to John Fante. And through Bukowski, I became a John Fante fan. He became a screenwriter. I think he lived in Pacific Palisades. If I'm
They all do.
Yeah.
I mean, I lived in Hollywood with an actor for a while, and after I moved to the Palisades, he came here, and we were walking down the street going someplace, and he goes, "You know what I like about your neighborhood?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "All of the actors in your neighborhood are working."
Yeah. Well, people talk about Beverly Hills, they talk about Hollywood, but it's really about Pacific Palisades.
Well, if you've got a family, there's a joke T-shirt that they sell at the Chamber of Commerce, and it says, "If you're rich, you live in Beverly Hills. If you're famous, you live in Malibu, and if you're lucky, you live in the Palisades." So basically, the people who live in the Palisades are the kind of people who make movies, who have families, because if you're living in the Hollywood Hills, your house is too small and the schools aren't great, and if you're living in Malibu, you're just kind of out there, and if you're raising family in Malibu, there's a good chance your kids will become drug addicts. Although it's not, the school systems. I don't think any of the school systems are immune from any of that at this point.
Mm-hmm. How about Culver City? That's up and coming, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, basically any place west of the 405. Is just stupidly expensive at this point. Yeah. Culver City is not as bad as some areas. Torrance isn't as bad as some areas, but it's all getting. I mean, I read the other day that that in order to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles, you need to make $120,000 a year. And so I don't know. I mean, you've got multiple people, you've got 4 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment, 2 people living in the living room, 2 people living in the bedroom. You've got a lot of, I would say roommate situations are like the status quo at this point. Mm-hmm. And that's not good.
No, I think it leads to breakdown, and I'll use the term that psychologists use, dysfunction. And it's intentional. It's engineered.
It is intentional, and it is engineered. And some of the worst it's weird because like you can really see it happening. You can see everything that Rosa Corey talks about in her Agenda 21 stuff in Santa Monica, because Rand is in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And kind of going out and Rand looks like a big eye if you look at it on Google Maps. Mm-hmm. In the middle of Santa Monica, and you can see radiating out from the eye, the smart city that's like growing up around the eye. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty interesting phenomenon.
Well, there has to be, and I guess I do know why they won't go near it, but there needs to be a whole new cultural geography of the greater Los Angeles area. The existing ones just don't get it. Either that, or they're looking at strictly through some sort of Marxist lens. Well, here's the working class over here. There's the immigrant here, but there's as you're doing, Peter. Maybe you're the one the person to do it. but there needs to be a contemporary overview of this geopolitical region because it's so important to world history, to the way we're going, because they're workshopping a lot of scenarios for the immediate and the long-term future, right where you're living. On that, well, it's the Silicon Valley, LA.
Well, I learned all of this stuff about the Frankfurt School, and Andrew Breitbart was the first one who I ever heard the term from,
Yeah.
Evans,
he grew up in BH, didn't he, himself?
He grew up in Brentwood.
Oh, Brentwood. Okay.
Just a couple miles that way.
Yeah.
But then when I realized that all these movers and shakers from the Frankfurt School lived in the Pacific Palisades, I was like, what the hell is going on here? It's just wild.
Yeah, well, it makes you come to the conclusion that communism and capitalism, it's all the same. It's all about the concentration of power and energy and wealth and all those goodies into one small group of hands.
I don't know. I think that the one thing that Tracy and I kind of touched on very early when we first started doing this is that I think Tracy Twyman was the first kind of clue. Tracy Twyman, who's a great kind of anthropological point of view author about the occult, who was found hanging in her garage a couple of years ago. Tracy pointed out that there's this esoteric power structure in almost everything that we're looking at, which is that there is a cover story, the exoteric story, the life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all men are created equal story that you give to the hoi polloi, that you give to the proletariat, right? And then you've got the esoteric power structure, which operates on a completely different level with a different set of rules.
Yeah.
And that's the way that the status quo is maintained. You tell people, most of the people, one story, and the people who are in control are operating with a different set of rules.
Absolutely. And that's why young people and certainly people at the university need to be introduced to the history of esotericism. And we're beginning to see it, but they can't go too far, right? Just like the mainstream and even the so-called indie news people, they can't mention those initials, CFR or World Bank or whoever. They can only go so far. But once you start, you put people on this radically new epistemology, let's call it esoteric epistemology, they're gonna take it and teach themselves at a certain point. I mean, Peter, Tracy, you're on your own course now. You read the foundational work, and you can fit whatever you read into or see or experience in that new epistemology.
Right, but that's part of
to get to that breakthrough point of that radically esoteric epistemology.
Right, and that's part of the initiatory path, right? Like you have to be invited in, but you're only invited in if you have demonstrated something that makes the insiders believe that you've got, the either the bloodline or the moral fiber to be part of their club, right?
Right. Well, you can get into the first chamber because they have to let you in there. Like, I was hired at the University of California, but they let you into the first chamber so they can evaluate you. And as you pass certain tests, then you go into the next chamber and on and on and on. The only chamber I got to was the water closet. So that's where it started and ended with me.
But see, if you had put a hidden camera in there and started blackmailing people, you might have gotten farther.
Well, this is not to say that I did not talk and mingle and deal with these individuals. I was not.
Well, they're all around. They're all around us. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, we always talk about it like it's it's like, ooh, it's a secret society. We don't really know who these people are. No, we know who they are.
It's open, but it's what I call the epistemology. It's the conscious awareness of what is taking place. And a lot of these people don't know themselves until they hear us chatting it up here. Oh, that's what I was involved with. that's the aha moment that I gave to my students. They go, oh, now I get it. Now I know I was on this track. Now I know I was tested. Now I know the whole reason for the standardized examinations and GPAs, all of it. If you can take people to that point, then, through film, through music, through books, through novels, fiction, then you've done your job.
Yeah. And then you get moved a chance to move up to the next level. Do you want to be in politics?
Yes, exactly.
So, how do people find you, Doc? Where are they going to find these projects that you're working on, and what do you do? Where can people find you now?
Well, my works in progress are done twice a week on the YouTube channel, Professor Hamamoto. Tuesday and Thursday I have a live cast, but they're posted after that. And that's just sort of an ongoing hour-long diary of my work and my research. I need to start writing some books, need to start getting some material out there. I have a Patreon account, of course. I'm trying to get off Twitter. I established a Gab account, and I know they're clamping down on dissidents, but that's about it. I think I have to start a web page, but my goal is to, as soon as possible, get off YouTube. I want to deplatform YouTube. I want to go on radio. I want to reach hundreds of thousands of people, millions perhaps, and that's just not megalomaniac wish fulfillment on my part of fantasy. Because again, remember, my market is Pacific oriented, and you have millions of people, English speaking people in Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, Japan, and more increasingly in Southeast Asia, not to mention South Asia, who want to see what's going on here in the US and in quote unquote Western world, filtered through my unique perspectives. So if anybody out there who's with Westwood One or with Netflix, hey, bring me up.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that if you can build an audience on a platform like YouTube, that companies like Westwood One are very interested in working with anybody who's already got an audience. And that, and one of the things, and again, I talked to Addy Ads for an hour or two the other day, that really seems to be missing in the kind of, I would say, truth-oriented, truth movement journalism is synthesizing things.
Yes.
It is really kind of boiling it down. We all like to kind of like do these long form videos. We're at 201:43 right now, and so we should get off pretty quickly. But there's a certain audience that will sit and listen to us talk for 2 hours, and it's very small. The people who can boil things down into Tim Pool makes 5-minute videos that are 20 minutes long because the YouTube algorithm supports longer videos, but he knows that most people don't want to listen that long. So he basically does a 5-minute video, and then he talks about bullshit for 15 minutes in order to make sure that the YouTube algorithm works. And he's ridden that horse to the point where he's got a bigger audience than CNN. So, if you can do that on whatever platform you wind up picking, then you can kind of punch your own ticket with a standard terrestrial radio contract. So that would be my advice.
Peter, I'll follow your advice. I'll use that formula, and before long, my Pacific Rim audience is going to make everybody, all the stockholders at Westwood One, very, very happy.
Very good.
Yeah.
I think that's terrific.
Good.
Anything else, Tracy?
No, I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in. I did put the link to the professor's YouTube page in the description box. So if you didn't catch that or don't know where to find them, you can go to the description on YouTube. And yes, thank you very much for your time, Professor. I feel like this is the first of probably many of these conversations because you've got such a breadth of knowledge. The next time I'm going to come prepared with a book that I want to ask you a question about.
And Tracy won't say this, but I will. I'm sure that Tracy's really stoked that you got this awesome microphone because it's great.
Well, it's a Yeti, and I made it blue purposely because everybody has black or gray.
Nice.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you so much.
Hey.
Thanks, everybody.
Peter, thank you for the invitation.
All right. And I'm looking forward to taking your picture.
Yes, let's do it. Up
All
with Mr. Gonzalez up there.
Indeed. All right. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.